Hey, listen, whoever's here, when you were alive, did you ever talk to anybody? Well, good evening, one and all, and welcome to another exciting or semi-exciting episode of Just Another Paranormal Podcast. No big deal. Just hanging around tonight. I brought in a couple of friends of mine. Tom Stewart's comedian extraordinaire. Aaron Bush, psychic extraordinaire.
So
Hello,
welcome.
Ken. Hello, Aaron. Thank you for having me.
Hello. I'm crashing your party tonight, so.
Yeah. So anybody that tuned in last week, you know that we have a lot of fun during this show. That's the whole idea of it. So tonight, we'd like to get into the lighter side of death. So I want to start this by asking both of you, starting with you, Tom, when did you actually in your life start to think about the possibility or the probability of death?
Ooh, it's such a deep question. I don't know. I mean, I had some relatives who died when I was fairly young, so that was probably when it first entered my mind. You know, I mean, we had a couple of pets that died, but they just went away to a farm. But when my grandmother died, that was probably when I had to learn about the death. We didn't send her to a farm.
Yeah. How about you, Aaron?
That's
Was
good.
there a point in your life where you just kind of like, it's like, you know, I'm not invincible anymore. This is gonna
I
happen.
feel kind of the same way. We had a fair amount of family deaths when I was younger. Probably starting at about 4. We had a bunch in one shot. But of course, you don't really understand that as a kid. So, but it's always been something that's sort of been part of my life because we've had many of them, sadly. Pets too. Pets are the ones that seem to really do me in the worst. But I think, yeah, it's just something I've always been aware of. I think I stopped being scared of it about 4 years ago.
I don't know if this is an ethnic thing or is this a common thing, but I remember being at my aunt's house. My grandmother, paternal grandmother, had passed, and somebody snapped a picture of her in her coffin. Now, I don't know if this is a Portuguese thing or if people tend to do this, but there was a picture of my grandmother in her coffin surrounded by the flowers. And every once in a while, this thing would show up. In family pictures, there's a pile of them you're going through, and there's my grandmother lying in a coffin. And it was like traumatized the hell out of me. For a long, every time I'd see it, I'd go,
Yeah.
kind of avert my eyes, you know. So probably if I saw it now, it would probably like, you know,
Trigger.
have some type of an effect on me. You're absolutely right, Peppa. Death and taxes. Well, I'm not so sure about taxes anymore. It depends.
Yeah.
It's not a
Depends how wealthy you are.
Right. How many
So-
loopholes you're aware of.
Yeah. But people do have different mindsets in terms of death. I guess when you're in your like late 30s, early 40s, this realization comes that's like, crap, I'm halfway there. You know, I'm like, okay, so you kind of put it out of your mind, you know. So before we get into this tonight, I want to talk about graveyards and cemeteries. We're going to take everybody back a little bit to a little bit of the history of what we're talking about. So this is a little segment we call Graveyard or Cemetery. Okay, so the difference between a graveyard and a cemetery. When we're talking about graveyards, this is what we mean. And typically graveyards are on the property or grounds of a church, and this is where parishioners were buried. And that land was deemed suitable for that purpose. One of the things about graveyards you'll see, and this is kind of a weirdo thing, but this is called a wolf stone. there anybody out there who wants to take a guess at why this particular style of internment is called a wolf stone? Anyone?
I'm not familiar with it.
A wolf stone essentially is stones that are laid into the ground to stop animals from digging up dead bodies.
Okay.
Because wolves would come along and do that. So these are called wolf stones. And you see them at certain cemeteries from way back in the day. And it was in the like the 1600s when it was decreed in Europe that you would have to bury bodies 6 foot deep. For two reasons. One was animals digging up the bodies, and the other was grave robbers. That was a big thing back then. So they decided to, make it a little harder on the ghouls that would come along. So that started in London actually in 1665, and we adopted it here because there were oftentimes floods and hurricanes would flood cemeteries, and if they were up on hills, some really bad things would happen when the bodies would be displaced and wash into the middle of town. Not a good thing. So that's the idea of that.
It's terrible for traffic.
Yeah, that happened on the east side of Providence on Benefit Street, actually in the 38 hurricane. That's I think in Colorado that happened, and they actually have a festival for it every year. I forget what it is, but the bodies washed off the mountain graveyard into town, and they celebrate it because it's like a soapbox derby except with coffins. And you design, like, there's coffins that are shaped like UFOs and things like that. So
that's great.
Have a lot of fun. Got a question, got to answer. Just discovered this show a week or two ago. It was only on once, Justin, so you haven't missed anything. Is there a set schedule? Thanks. The answer to that is probably every other Wednesday, because I have my grandson in here and he pretty much runs the place. So Wednesdays looks like that's when it's going to happen. So thanks for joining us tonight. We appreciate it. And then in the Victorian era, people were dying left and right. And it got to the point that these people were taking up a lot of prime real estate and a lot of room. So that's when the idea of cemeteries began. And one of the designs is called a garden cemetery. And the reason for this was because they were actually our first parks. So one of the reasons they designed cemeteries like this is to try to rid people of the fear of graveyards. People would go in, they'd have family outings, they'd have picnics, there were trees, and in a lot of ways, like I said, they were the first parks that we had in this country. And in fact, the first garden cemetery in the United States is this one right here, Mount Auburn in Massachusetts. So as you can see, it wasn't that sterile an environment. It was pretty attractive. And, people like the idea of spending a great day at the cemetery. Now, the other thing that would happen, I'm getting ahead of myself here. The other thing that would happen is funerals, people would dress in their Sunday best, and funerals became a place to be seen. It was like going to church on Sunday. So they didn't want to do it in a dingy old graveyard. So they created these places that had a bit more class to them, and then people felt a lot more comfortable.
Yeah, there's a real nice one in Providence. The Swan Point Cemetery, Garden Cemetery, is gorgeous.
Yeah, Swan Point is absolutely beautiful.
It's still used like a park. You can go there. There'll be people jogging, having picnics, sitting by the pond, and just stones around you everywhere, graves everywhere. But it's like a park. It is all kinds of wildlife running around, and different types of
Mhm.
trees and flowers and bushes. It's actually very meditative and relaxing. I used to live near it, so I used to go to it a lot, and it used to be weird that I was hanging out in a cemetery. But as a kid, we used to ride our bikes in there like it
Yeah.
was a park. We really did treat it like a park.
Well, again,
Yeah.
there were a multitude of reasons. They ran out of room in graveyards. In the Victorian era, everyone was terrified of death. So again, they were trying to create an environment that people maybe will alleviate their fear of death. And hey, people came like a town square and hung out. The other thing
Yeah.
these cemeteries were good for, in a lot of ways, they were art museums,
Yeah.
because all these different sculptors now could display their creations at these particular types of cemeteries. So, in a weird way, it became an art museum.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah,
so
some
and
very elaborate ones at Swan Point.
absolutely. And then different types of cemeteries. This is kind of antiseptic. This is your basic public cemetery. Rows and rows and rows of headstones. People buy plots. Then you have your private cemetery, and this is usually on plots of land owned by a family. And I'm not sure how prevalent this is. I guess if you're grandfathered in, you can still have burials as long as they're overseen by the proper officials. And then, of course, you got military cemeteries, and you have to have a specific standing in the military to request to be buried there. And then you have the pauper cemetery, which is designated for people whose bodies went unclaimed or unidentified, or just couldn't afford a decent burial. And a lot of these still exist in some of the graveyards and older cemeteries throughout the country. And then finally, you have the underground, you have the catacombs. This is a shot of the Paris catacombs, which is essentially an underground city which goes for miles and miles and miles. And it's, for all intents and purposes, a maze. And then I think the biggest one in the United States is in New York. And that's accessible by the public. So that's a little bit of a background of the different type of cemeteries and how it all took place, and the difference between a graveyard and a cemetery. I mean, they're pretty interchangeable types of names, and it's perfectly fine to call them each, but there is a pretty dramatic difference. And the final thing I'll show you here, you'll see it a lot of them, is a crypt.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot of times crypts will be owned by prominent and very wealthy families, where relatives, as they pass, are interred there. And oftentimes, a lot of them were in cemeteries to store bodies in the wintertime, when it was very difficult to dig, when we were still doing those kind of things by hand. So that's we can go into some of our. Oh, well, Pepper Jackie is in there now, and she is like telling everybody what's going on with the shows. Thank you, Pepper. That's good. What's going on, folks? Nothing, Taz. Deborah Perry. Good evening, Ken. Good evening to you, Deborah.
Good evening.
Thanks for joining us tonight. Good evening, Aaron and Tom.
Hello, Deborah.
Hey, Miss Deborah.
Welcome to the Graveyard Show.
Yeah. When he's not
I'm taking notes.
Not
school.
exploring abandoned asylums, you can find me walking in cemeteries. Okay. Fair enough. Or maybe I won't. One or the other. So here in New England, and a lot of the old cemeteries, I want to talk a little bit about the different style, because you see these etchings, the cherub heads and things like that. And everything has a meaning. For example, this is called a plain style stone. You see these a lot. 1640 to 1710 and it signals resignation, like acceptance of the inevitable. This is the death's head. This is pretty common. And what that embodies is a sense of awe at what the whole experience of death is. Then you get the cherubs and angels, and this signifies confidence. Like one is sure that they are going on to their greater rewards. Another common one is the urn and willow, which is just a symbol of mourning for those who have passed away. Then you got monumentalism, and this signifies defiance. Someone who fought to the end, and these were all contracted from stonecutters back then. And every once in a while, you'll see them where the word misspelled that they would literally chisel out and just start all over again, for lack of an eraser. And the modern plain style signals ignorance. So I'm not sure ignorant of what exactly, but
I had no idea. I went to Salem for the first time when we were up there. Cody and Satori took me over there, and we did the cemetery over by the witches memorial that they had. And I had never seen detail on headstones like that. And I had no idea about the history of any of those stones. Of course, now when I go back, I'm going to have to take my notes, figure out what's what, because that's a lot of work and time that goes into those things. So it's interesting to hear that there's reasons for the different designs and that they actually mean something. So I find that really interesting. I didn't know that.
every one of them does. The thing that when people see a skull on it, immediately they're thinking that, was this person a witch or no? That's not at all. It was just a symbol of the transition between life and death. So, but, they weren't really into the symbolism at that point. It was all pretty innocent at that time.
Right.
But we want to get into some very odd headstones here we're going to run through. So I'm going to ask you if you've ever heard the story of Mary Delancey.
It sounds
That
familiar. If I've heard it, it probably came from you.
Mary
Chances
Delancey
are good, right?
Mary Delancey passed away in 1985 in the town of Yarmouthport in Yarmouth, Massachusetts, down toward the Cape. And Mary was a very unusual character. She was, I guess, kind of curmudgeonly interactive with the people in town. She wasn't a very pleasant woman. So, of course, the townspeople treated her in kind. Kids would go by the house, they'd throw rocks, they'd make fun of her. She would scream at them from the porch. Adults pretty much did the same thing. And then a lot of people, of course, eventually labeled her a witch and all the rest of it. So it was a lot of conflict between this old woman and the people of the town. And like I said, she passed in 1985. This is in ancient times. Well, Mary Delancey decided on her tombstone she was going to have the last word with the people of Yarmouthport. So I'd like to put what's engraved on her headstone up on the screen for everyone to see. May eternal damnation be upon those in Whalingport, who, without knowing me, have maliciously vilified me. May the curse of God be upon them and theirs.
Wow.
Now I visited.
Feel?
Yeah, I visited.
That's direct and to the point.
I visited this cemetery multiple times, and I've taken pictures of this tombstone and seen it a number of times. So apparently what had happened was when the town of Yarmouthport caught wind of this and went to see the tombstone, I mean, they were beside themselves. They were very upset and went so far as to try to have it removed in a legal sense. So whether it was the descendants of Mary Delancey or a lawyer that she had retained, it became a court battle. And Mary Delancey won.
Yep.
Because she had bought the plot. She had entered into a contract with the engraver. And there's nothing on the books in that particular town that prohibits or limits any kind of speech, maybe vulgarities or something along those lines. But that headstone still exists today. And
Awesome.
Mary Delancey placing a curse on the people of Yarmouthport, Massachusetts.
Well, the First Amendment carries you over into the grave, so it's still there for you.
I'll tell you, I spent 10 years as a probate attorney, amongst other types of law. But one of the things that would come up is death is such an unfun conversation. I mean, you don't go to lawyers because you're happy ever, right? But we started finding that people were trying to have some fun in death, and so they would write funny things into like their burial dispositions, like what they wanted done with their bodies and why. I mean, we saw some crazy, funny things that people would put in just like in an attempt to sort of lighten the mood. But I don't think we ever had anybody who was angry enough to put anything like visceral like that on a tombstone. But I've seen some funny stuff that people have wanted in death. And it does stand in court, because as long as it's witness notarized and you're, under no undue influence and you haven't lost your mind, courts can't do anything about it.
Yeah, exactly. So, and she won the case even beyond the grave. Mary Delancey won her case, and there's nothing that they could do about it. What's interesting is in the long run now, it's become something of a tourist attraction. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that was her intention, but when you go to ancient Yarmouth Cemetery to see this, there's all sorts of ice cream shops and sandwich shops all over the place. So everybody kind of benefits by this, I guess.
Well, maybe that was part of the curse. Now they're full of tourists every day.
Yeah, now you can't get across the bridges there.
Yep.
We call them Taurons down here in St. Augustine.
Taurons, yeah.
I know. I want to move on. I want to pay attention to everybody who's in chat. Thanks for joining us tonight. As you can tell, this is not that well structured a show by design, because we do plenty of that other stuff. So we like to just come in once every couple of weeks and have a little bit of fun with our friends and think of some like really odd topics and weird things that we might want to talk about that would interest you. Pepper Jackie, headstones, I told you I was sick. You're getting ahead of us, Pepper Jackie. Getting ahead of us. And of course, our friend Android Paranormal. Hey, everyone. Hello. Hello, Android. How are you? So, Aaron, you're talking about people who have accepted their lot in life and have decided that they're going to handle death with humor, which is probably a good way to go.
Agreed.
Probably a good way to go. So we want to take you through some of these people who left a bit of a legacy behind. Humorous, and some of these people are famous, and I know you'll recognize them. But to the end, humor was their defense, their lot in life. So the first one we want to show you is the great Leslie Nielsen, who died in 2010, and on his tombstone, let her rip.
Yep.
Tom, do you have any? I don't quite. I'm trying to think of quotes from movies for him, but I'm not quite getting the let her rip.
Oh, Leslie Nielsen. Well, the let her rip part is because he used to have a little farting noise device in his pocket whenever he did an interview, whether it was the Tonight Show or the news. He would be talking and he would press the fart machine and make it seem like he farted while he was talking, and he would keep a complete straight face. And he was known for that. Every interview he did, he would fart during it with the little fart machine he had in his pocket. But he was in Police Squad, the movies, Police Squad. You remember those? Well, the TV show, and then there was the movies too, where he was with what's her name there, Elvis's wife, and they did a few of them. O.J. Simpson was in it. You
Yeah.
remember those movies? So he had lots of classic lines in that. He was in the Airplane movies, so he had lots of classic lines in that. He was just the funniest, though. If you go on YouTube and you look him up on like the Tonight Show or something like that, Letterman, I think he did it with, and he's giving a straight answer, and then he'll just lean and make the fart noise, and it's just the funniest thing because sometimes he would do it and the interviewer didn't expect it and didn't know that he does that, and they didn't know how to react.
The funny
So that
thing
was his thing.
In the 50s and 60s, he played in a lot of science fiction movies.
Yeah.
And he was a very serious actor.
Mm-hmm.
And who the heck knew that the guy had a sense of humor like that? Erin has just dropped out because her dog Bernie is
must have
in need
pulled
of
the cord on her.
Or maybe, or maybe Bernie shut the camera down, or
yeah, the
I'm
dog
just doing
wants
what
to be
Bernie
on.
does best, which is interrupt when I'm doing live streaming shows. So we have our water bottle just in case to spray him with. So we're good. Sorry about that.
We've got some openings during the week. Bernie, we can give Bernie a show.
Sure. He'd get some ratings for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. All right,
He's
the next tombstone we're going to get to, apparently Auntie Kay or Grandma Kay had an incredible recipe for fudge that I guess was in high demand. So she decided that she was going to do everyone a favor and put her particular fudge recipe on her tombstone. Cooked to softball stage.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know what that is.
Like cool
Pour
beat
on marble slab. Cool and beat and eat.
I think I'm going to put that on my tombstone. Cool and beat and eat. That'll sum me up right there.
Or that could actually be cause of death too.
Yeah, it could be. That's what they say. But
could.
So put the recipe. Yeah, I like that. She didn't take it to her grave. She left it at her grave.
Aunt Kay's famous fudge. I love it. Fudge recipe. People would get the recipe over a dead body. Oh,
there you
literally.
Go. Yep.
All right.
There's the joke right there.
Way of looking at it. Pepper, you mentioned this before, and this is an actual tombstone.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I told you I was sick. So moving past that, the next one. I made some good deals and I made some bad ones. I really went into the hole with this one.
A good one.
That's great.
I mean, at that point, you have a certain, we joke about it all the time. What do you want written on your headstone? And everybody's got, some type of quote or something like that. But, I mean, I look at it like if you stumble across something like this going through a cemetery, I mean, it's got to make your day, right? Because immediately you have to start wondering about what type of person was this? I mean, they must have been a character in life.
Yeah, they have to have been. They must have had a great sense of humor, came from a family that has a sense of humor, absolutely, without a doubt.
Our next one is obviously big Star Wars fan.
Yeah.
Yes.
Taz Zaliuski, I guess Zaliuski.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, what's cool about that is that's Force Ghost Yoda. That's not just Yoda. That's Yoda in Force Ghost form.
Yeah.
So that's Yoda dead too.
Mm-hmm.
Alive you are not, Taz.
That's right. In peace rest.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
In peace rest.
Oh, you leave a piece of yourself behind. Hey, Star Wars was his thing.
I wonder if George Lucas sued them yet.
You go back. How old was?
It would be Disney now, actually.
Well, he was not a very old.
No,
I mean,
he was
this guy
38
was,
years old when he passed.
What? 7 years old when Star Wars came out, right? 77.
Yep. and he died
big
young,
part of
only
his life.
38. So yeah, so I guess he got to see the prequels, unfortunately, but
Yeah. Well, he missed the animated ones, which
yeah.
jury's still out on that for me. Our next one up is a famous director and writer, Billy Wilder. Some incredible movies. I'm a writer, but then nobody's perfect. So, and then the great Mel Blanc, the man of 1,000 voices. Beep, that's all, folks.
Of course, it was the
Yep.
best.
I mean, you could almost see that coming with that guy, right? I mean, you could
Yeah.
almost see it coming.
Of course, yeah.
It couldn't have been anything else.
One of the saddest posters I ever saw was when he died, and the poster was all the characters he was the voice for, all bowing their heads at his gravestone. And I'm like,
Yep.
why am I so sad at a cartoon?
I remember
It
that,
really
and I
was. It
still
was
get
heartbreaking.
goosebumps thinking about it.
Yeah, it was so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh.
I know.
Then there's someone here with a little bit of disappointment. I think he's trying to send a message to his family on this one. I was hoping for a pyramid.
Nice.
That's great. I like that one. That was my favorite.
A little cost prohibitive.
Yeah.
Well, we still haven't figured out how to make them as well as the Egyptians did. So.
Yeah. I mean, we all know about the obelisks and the pyramids and the, four-sided triangles. They're supposed to draw energy, I guess, which is why the Masons designed the Washington Monument. It was supposed to draw energy into the city.
Yeah. Basically an energy generator shape.
Epic fail there.
Well, there's energy, but I don't know.
Right.
Well, I'll tell you, I get no respect at all.
All right. There goes the neighborhood.
Nice.
I love it.
There goes the neighborhood. Rodney Dangerfield, right?
Yeah.
The great Rodney. And then also the equally great Jack Lemmon in...
That's great. I think that's my favorite so far.
Well, top billing is important no matter what.
So true.
Yeah, right.
So true.
Somebody's going to have to help me on this because apparently this is part of a bigger, elaborate joke and scheme. And neither of these people are dead yet. But Penn and Teller has a headstone that says, "Is this your card? Three of clubs." And I think that I didn't have time to, but I'll bet you if you Google that, these guys have come up with some type of game and leave clues, a card trick that everyone can play. And if you visit their grave at some point, then it's like that will be the card, very clever.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if they were going to be buried together. I mean, they've spent their whole lives working together. Why would you want to be buried together?
Well, that could be, what do you call them? When you're actually buried someplace, but they erect a monument to you someplace else.
Yeah, could be something like that. Yeah.
And
I just looked it up.
There's a word for that. I think it begins with a C. I'm not sure.
It's on Cenotaph. So I just looked up the story.
A cenotaph. That's it. At the bottom of there.
It's part of a bigger thing.
Right.
Yeah.
A cenotaph.
There's a whole story on what that particular gravestone's for.
Right.
It looked like there was a stone marker next to the headstone too, right to the top right there. Some sort of a marker.
I've seen that in a few of them, and we'll talk about that in a minute because I think it has something to do with Jewish cemeteries, a marker of some type. But moving on with this, next is variety host Merv Griffin. I will not be right back after these messages.
Nice.
That's funny.
That's a good one too.
Yeah.
And I guess a lot of these are like at places like the Hollywood Forever Cemetery
Yeah.
and places like that. And there's another one in Los Angeles too.
Yeah, and I think you can tour most of those too.
Here's
If
another.
that's your thing.
Here's another great one. Don Adams
Oh yeah.
from Get Smart,
Mhm.
and celebrating his greatest role as Maxwell Smart.
Yeah, that's great. Nice little picture of him. on his talking
Served in
machine.
the United States Marine Corps during World War II.
Wow.
Movie buff and never late for post time. Don Adams.
Bobby Jones has a good one up at. There's a cemetery in Atlanta called Oak. I think it's Oak Lawn, and it's huge. And it's got. I know the Ghost Brothers have been there a bunch because it's close to them, but just mausoleums and all kinds of stuff. But Bobby Jones's grave is there.
Oh.
And there, I mean, if you were ever short on golf balls, that's the place to go. I mean, they have to clear them out every day because people just leave golf balls all
tributes,
over, golf tees, all over his gravestone, which is pretty neat.
Anybody out there, I'm going to give bonus points to anybody in chat who can tell me who was the head writer for the TV show Get Smart. You have 5 seconds.
Yeah, can't Google it.
I'm not giving you a chance to Google
5
it.
seconds. The head writer, I wouldn't.
All right, time's up. It was Mel Brooks.
Oh,
I love Mel Brooks.
And if
He's going to have a good headstone,
I figured it was an old timer.
Yeah. If you watch Get Smart, everybody was on drugs who wrote that show. I'm telling you. Everyone was smoking the devil's lettuce.
all the best art comes from that, though.
Oh my God. It was like
drugs and pain, right?
Yep.
Can't have one without the other.
Now here's another one that it just goes in the category of it just stands to reason.
Oh yeah.
Mr. Ripley. I
died,
died,
believe it or not.
I love it.
That's funny.
That's awesome. And direct from Tombstone, Arizona, Doc Holliday died in bed. Okay.
Yeah.
That'd have been better if it had been like he died in bed with 6 women. He died in bed after a bender. Like something else at the end would have made that much cooler.
Put those 3 dots so that we could fill in the rest ourselves.
Right.
So along the lines of Don Adams, whose character was part of his epitaph, was Al Lewis.
Oh yeah, Grandpa Munster.
Grandpa from the Munsters.
Yep.
Upside down cross and all.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yep. He stayed with the theme there.
Those eyes are just absolutely freaking me out, though.
Mm-hmm.
That looks kind of disturbing.
The big pointy ears. Yep.
No eyeballs.
All right. So, oops, I would never do that again. It would be a funny one. Everyone is weighing in on what they want on their own tombstone. Okay. Sarah Yusuf is killing us with trivia. Al Lewis ran for political office. Yes, he did. Upside down cross. Wow. Where'd you get that from? An upside down cross for Grandpa? Let's go back.
Yeah,
it was on. Look at his cross.
Upside down.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think he was in the Knights Templar.
So. No, I think he was just going along with the Munsters theme.
Mm-hmm.
The vampire theme.
Right.
I'll tell you what, his commitment to his character, I respect it. Right to the end, right?
Yeah, because they didn't put his picture up there; they put his character picture up there. So
right
now, somebody's going to tell me that he was actually buried in his Grandpa Munster costume, or
who knows?
I might be confusing him. Wasn't Bela Lugosi buried in his Dracula costume? I'm pretty sure.
I think that's the legend.
Yeah. Weird. So now we'll move on to some of the more ornate headstones, some of the more famous ones. This is Dudley Moore. You did it up right.
Yeah.
Nice
piano.
And
how has he been dead that long?
Which one?
Nothing more. 2002.
Oh wow.
Good
Yeah, over
Lord.
20 years. Yeah, it doesn't seem like it was that long ago.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah. Then the infamous Al Capone.
Nice.
He went out. He went out big.
Mm.
This is another one of those like the Penn and Teller ones. This is on Martha's Vineyard, and this is actually where John Belushi was buried, because there's another monument to him in Illinois where he was born. But in checking on this, I found out that this is his actual grave, and it's really awesome, I guess, how this particular headstone probably matches so many of the older ones on Martha's Vineyard
Mm-hmm.
in some of the older cemeteries. You know, the skull and crossbones is a nice touch. But there's something on the bottom that's like, long live rock and roll, or rock and roll lives on, or something along those lines. But that's the final resting place of John Belushi. Then there's Andy Warhol, and as predicted, there's Campbell soup cans everywhere.
Of course.
Yeah.
Right, split pea, chicken noodle. And one of my favorite ones is Johnny Ramone from the rock group The Ramones. Always the very understated Johnny Ramone.
Yeah. What an
Right.
amazing carving that is. And look at the location. I mean, he's right by the water, and he's got the palm trees, and wow.
Well, the punk rocker's got a primo spot.
Yeah, he does.
Absolutely. Following along with musicians, this is Jimi Hendrix.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing, I mean, significant, but not really ornate. Certainly not like Bo Diddley.
Oh my.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, wow, I'm going to heaven.
Pharaoh. He's a
And
pharaoh.
probably, arguably,
That looks like a southern cemetery too.
the most famous rock stars in Paris, Jim Morrison.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. His
Somewhere
statue looks sadder year to year.
Yeah.
Looks
Somewhere along the line here, I messed up because I had Elvis Presley's in there too. His is lying on the ground. I'm not saying it's a wolf stone, but it's that type of thing where it's laid out on the ground.
Yeah. It's like on display more than a wolf stone.
And then you've got this honey of a thing, the great country singer George Jones.
Wow.
My
wow. That's quite a thing.
goodness. Yeah.
Yeah,
My goodness.
Kind of looks like a jukebox in the center.
Oh yeah, kind of.
My goodness gracious. Okay.
It's so expensive, that stuff. It's so expensive to get headstones and burials, and oh my God.
Yep.
Well, we got questions. And if you have questions for us, shout them out. We have one in there already. Android. I wonder what Ozzy Osbourne's headstone will look like. I've been saying that about Keith Richards for 40 years now.
Well, we'll never know what Keith Richards looks like.
No.
He'll outlive us all.
He's never going to die. Ever.
But, yeah, Ozzy's will be an interesting one if he's, goes with the bats and stuff for a theme. I don't know.
Right. I got a question that we're going to go right to Tom on because of his amazing podcast, My Paranormal Story, where he has touched on this particular topic, Tom. So I'm going to let you give your opinion first. We have a question from Android. Let's discuss the myth. Are graveyards genuinely haunted? If so, by human spirits or non-human entities? If humans, why are they hanging out there? Kind of an age-old question. What say you, Tom?
I've always said that if a cemetery is haunted, I don't think it's haunted by any of the spirits that dwelled in the bodies that are buried there. I feel like if a spirit is going to choose to be a haunting, it's going to do it someplace familiar, like, an old home or a place that it used to spend lots of time, or maybe it would attach itself to something that was important in life. I don't feel like spirits just roam around cemeteries where their body is buried. That just doesn't seem to make sense to me. But I do believe that there's a lot of sad energy and things like that at cemeteries, and I believe that could attract some sort of haunted entities or whatever you want to call them. Because we've certainly seen our share during investigations, and when I grew up next to Swan Point Cemetery, there were a number of reasons why there were paranormal things happening there, but it didn't really have to do as much with the spirits of the bodies, but of what the living was doing in those cemeteries.
Right.
So the short answer is I don't think cemeteries are usually haunted. They're also very hard to investigate because you got all the outdoor elements to deal with as far as animals, sound, weather and things like that. So but I don't think necessarily all cemeteries are haunted.
Yeah. Aaron, how about you?
I agree with. Now, I haven't spent a lot of time in cemeteries. We do have some relatively well-known ones here in St. Augustine. There was one I remember as a kid getting a bad vibe from, but I think to Tom's point, you almost have. There's so much grief and emotion in cemeteries anyway. At funerals, like, are those emotions sort of forming into its own sort of energy entity that sort of roams the place? Because I'm with you, Tom. I think if you're gone, that's the last place you're going to hang out. You're going to want to go somewhere you're familiar with, somewhere you love, a place, a situation, whatever. But I do believe, from an energetic standpoint, that there's so much concentrated emotion in a place like that it still lingers there. Or is it like a poltergeist type situation where it sort of takes on its own, like it's a thought form created into a thing now?
Yeah. I think that's more likely.
Yeah.
I think that cemeteries can be as haunted as any place else, but I don't think more so, probably a lot less so than any place else. Kind of the way I look at it, if a spirit is called upon, in my own experience, it can be at the speed of a thought. They can come from anywhere.
Yeah.
I've had visitations from spirits through Cody and Satori that came 3/4 of the way across the country, from Colorado to Massachusetts, just because I was reading about them. This particular person, reading about them, not saying their name out loud at all, just simply reading about them. So at the speed of thought in my own mind, this spirit showed up to dispel a rumor that she was haunting someplace. Okay.
Yep.
So I think with the right people, you can be pretty much anywhere. I have been places that we've investigated for a number of years, and then suddenly my mother came through.
Right.
I don't know if she'd ever been to Coventry, Rhode Island in her entire life. She certainly was never at this place. And if you've watched any of the live shows that we've done, from the Shanley Hotel, from the Oliver House, people are coming through just simply because they hear the voices of people who are in our studio moderating this thing. George's mom, Alyssa Phoenix's cousin and friend.
And cousin. Mm-hmm.
And they're not even live with us on this location.
No.
So
Alyssa was in California.
Yeah, Alyssa's in California. We're in Massachusetts. So I think to answer, to put a bow on it, I would say no more or no less, depending on, if you have the ability to reach out to someone, you could be anywhere. You could be at a Home Depot, for example. But I think cemeteries kind of get a bad rap because it is a place of the final stop on the tour. Right. And because there are literally, physically bodies there, immediately, the imagination goes wild and people say, well, why not? They're buried right here. I'm not a big advocate of putting a recorder on a headstone, because I know that if I went to the cemetery, even though I do this, and somebody had a recorder on my mom and dad's headstone, just randomly trying to reach out and contact somebody, I mean, that would upset me a lot. When people just go in there, hoping to get something. So,
yeah, I always tell people, be respectful. Don't investigate a cemetery if you're really, if there's really no reason to. It's not a place to go for thrill seeking, in my opinion. A lot of times they're private and you could get arrested for it anyway. But to me, I don't think there's really much reason to go to cemeteries just looking for a specific, if you're looking for something specific, maybe, but if you're just looking for a random paranormal thrill, just have respect and don't even bother going.
Yeah. Well, we were at that particular cemetery Mary Delancey is buried in, and there were all sorts of claims. And people like Mary Ellen Guiley and John Zaffis had visited this particular cemetery, and there's supposed to be the obligatory woman in white who walks the pathways of this place, and there was nothing there that we did not debunk. Off to the side, this smell of rotting something or other. Don't go into the woods. It's forbidden. So, of course, the first thing we do is go into the woods. And there's a big pile of grass clippings there. That's where when they mow the cemetery, that's where so you get all this methane smell coming off of it and everything. And,
sulfur decompose.
Yeah, sometimes people don't want to take the next step because it might kill the story, and that's and that's all well and good. That's fine. So I've never been a big one for investigating cemeteries.
Yeah, we had at the farm there was a group that was camping in the middle of the night, and they were looking for the cemetery in the woods back there. And one of the girls was convinced that she had come across a demon because she smelled sulfur, and I was like, honey, it's been raining for days. There is stuff decomposing in the woods and trees and leaves, but she was just adamant that it was a demon. It's like, but to your point, like, okay, take the next step of what's logically happening in your environment. Things are decomposing, just because you're next to a cemetery. She inferred that it was a demon because she was near a cemetery and she could smell the, so you kind of help the person sort of walk through the next step. It's like, no, sorry, there's no demons. It's just rotting leaves and grass. Sorry to disappoint.
I used to take occasionally new investigators to a cemetery to train them. Mm-hmm. And the reason I did it was just because of the atmosphere. You might as well get used to the spooky vibe.
Yeah.
When, an indoor location wasn't available. And it also, get used to the idea that sometimes we may be outside doing this. And we'd film them and then review the film, because if you're going to make your mistakes, which we all do, don't do them in the public eye. Make them out amongst us when we'll correct them. So when you are around the public or in someone's home, then, you have a better idea of how to proceed on those things. But I stopped doing that because I just thought it was kind of hokey in a way. I mean, it was just handy, you know what I mean?
Right.
But then again, I don't want to be disrespectful to anyone. Sarah Yusuf would like to know, aren't graveyards and cemeteries originally consecrated ground? I would say probably I would lean more toward graveyards, Sarah, because a lot of cemeteries are non-denominational. So the only thing consecrated is when you have person of the cloth that comes out, you get your, gives you the final goodbye, says a prayer. Graveyards, yeah, because at a certain church, whatever that denomination was among the parishioners, then that ground certainly would be blessed. But I think a lot less of that now than there was, in the Victorian era, or even prior to that. So I lean more toward graveyards being blessed at one point, when it was decided that parishioners would be buried there, but not so much anymore. What else do we have here?
I learned a lot tonight.
Yeah, the woods at night would work for that purpose too, Ken. Nah, too many mosquitoes, Android.
Yeah.
Lots of ticks.
Yeah.
No ticks.
You're not going to have mountain lions running around cemeteries, or will you? I don't.
You may not have mountain lions, but you certainly will have fisher cats.
Yeah, depending on what part of the country you're in, who knows? You could have bears, you could have all kinds of stuff.
Well, like I said, being in a cemetery brings a creepier vibe than even being in the woods.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
You have access to haunted locations now, Ken, that you can bring trainees into. You don't need to go to the cemetery.
We're going to this place with this rich history of paranormal activity. You have to learn to turn it off and don't even think about it, and don't let it influence you either way.
Yeah.
Have you had any EVPs of ghosts joking with you? Sarah, plenty. Plenty. Yeah, that's my answer. We have plenty of those kind of things.
Yeah, when a spirit usually have a personality that's similar to their personality when they were alive. So, if they were jokers, they're probably jokers on the other side too,
Yeah. Yeah.
Same thing with grumpy ones and, whatever.
I had one just last year. Tom was with us when the guy was making fun of my hat.
That's right. That's right. He was. Yeah. Well, in his defense, he didn't know what your hat was. He was from so many years ago that he didn't know what a baseball cap was.
No, actually, it was a knit. It was a knit hat. It was winter. It was cold.
Oh, that's right. It was. Yeah, you were wearing a toque.
Doesn't understand beanie either, probably.
Yeah, through the kids, it's like, hey, did your mother knit you that hat? Oh, you're a funny guy, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, he was.
Well, then you had busted on you. Was it the Payne house or the Oliver house where you guys were talking about the? Had to have been. Where's Sarah Whipple? Payne house, right?
Yes.
Whipple is Payne house. Yeah.
When she was joking about how she remembers the flood that you guys had.
Oh yeah.
Clearly.
Mm-hmm.
She thought that was funny.
I mean, we've been teased. We've been in on the joke. They've laughed at our jokes. It's amazing. Yeah. But it's pretty rewarding too, because all those questions, like Tom said, if we retain our personality and characteristics, and a lot of times this is why when we just have conversations and don't address them at all, we will get recordings of them kind of want to join in.
Yep.
The fun.
Yeah.
A little bit and have an opinion on it.
That was like one of our little secrets for EVPs. Just sit in a room and talk and don't look for them and they'll show up. They want to be part of the conversation.
Yeah.
That's absolutely. A really good point.
Yeah.
That's a really good
point. I got 4 more of these things before we get out of here. I'm going to play in pretty rapid succession. Some celebrities, very understated, you would think that they had these huge tributes and memorials, but not so. This is Frank Sinatra.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, very I can see him just having a respectable one.
This is John Wayne.
Oh, wow.
Penny Marshall. You see that marker, Tom?
Oh, yeah. Yep, up to the top right. Yep. But hers, she had her L on there, so that was kind of cool.
Laverne.
What she was famous for. Yeah.
And Don Rickles.
Yep. Yep. Well, people like Don Rickles and Frank Sinatra, they were kind of like, they were funny guys, but they had to be straight guys sometimes too. You know what I mean? Because there's a certain time to be funny and a certain time not to be. And to them, I think death was a very respectful thing. You would never make a joke about something like that. Yeah. So I think that's kind of probably like a mafia style type of a thought there. for
Good
those
thought
guys.
too. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's like Sarah said, dad jokes are a different type of provocation. I get it.
Yeah.
This is not a dad bod, Sarah. This is a father figure.
We should try that sometime, though, at an EVP session. Try some knock jokes or something and see if we get responses.
We've messed
See.
everybody's
Yeah.
week. We've messed up everybody's week because, we're on Wednesday. From now on, every other Wednesday, we'll likely do this. And we'll be bringing in different people to just kind of hang out with us. And like I said, this is a little bit different show than we usually do, where, we start digging deep into things. We like to have a little bit of fun and stay a little goofy, come up with, weird things that no one really talks about. So that's the purpose of this. But we don't mind the questions, though. Android. Again, Android. Since your research indicates emotions make an energy imprint on places like graveyards, does that include extreme human emotion can open portals or attract negative entities? Well, Aaron, this is kind of your ball game. I interpret that to mean another word for energy in that case would probably be intention, right?
Yeah, I was going to say exactly that. I think, like you take any haunted location, especially if there's a negative connotation to that location, your intention and thought process upon crossing that threshold into that property is going to delineate exactly what your experience is going to feel like, in my opinion. Do I think it can open portals? I think honestly don't know the answer to that. I think I know I look at somebody like myself who's a pretty intense sensitive. I think by virtue of who we are, we can open them just because we're sensitive, but not on purpose. I don't know about how it would attract negative entities. I'm not saying it can't happen, but again, I think that's intention based, like you said, Ken.
Mm-hmm.
I think it has everything to do with that.
Sarah, I prefer Thursday. My grandson, who sleeps over every Thursday, would prefer Wednesday, I'm sure. And that's the big reason. Thursdays, my grandson comes over and
Hey, family first.
spread them. But the other thing, too, if you're going this route, is I think negative emotions can absolutely be a beacon and a lighthouse for things. If there's abuse in the house, or if there's prior abuse in the house, there could be future abuse in the house because of that residual kind of energy that goes on.
True.
If you live in a messy house, you could attract something negative. If you're disorganized, you could attract something negative.
Well, that's usually the root of a poltergeist, is because somebody experienced some negative emotions because of whatever, abuse, verbal, physical, or whatever, and that ended up leading to the poltergeist activity in a home.
Mm-hmm.
That always seems to come from a negative situation. And many other things too.
I mean, it can certainly tie in. I've had cases where I've had a difficult conversation with people to just tell them, you need to clean your house up.
Yeah.
Hoarders and boxes everywhere. And I mean, they've lived there for 7 years. It's not like they just moved, but let some light in, get some light, open the shades, get some flowers in here. Put yourself in a different place mentally, psychologically. And that may alleviate some of the heaviness inside of a house. Light is a great deodorant to negativity, in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So, Android, I guess, to your point, human emotions can affect your environment. I mean, there's no question. It's like the power of prayer. If you got everybody pulling on the same end of the rope, some remarkable things can happen. True. Just by that collective consciousness of people. Yeah. But negativity can also affect the living. If you're having a problem, it's going to trickle down to your significant other, your children, your relatives, your friends. Yep. Everybody, gets thrown into that soup.
And a lot of times the solution to that is a good energetic clear out, whether it's Reiki or whatever it is, to your point, but tying that with intention, with the goal to clear in the energetic space around you, but then also internally, can be a pretty quick fix for some of that as well.
Yeah. Well, this is why tonight we wanted to give like a different look into people's mindsets. People who have passed on that somewhere along the line made a decision that I'm going to leave something positive, something humorous, something funny in the world in the physical sense. Because, a lot of these people, their humor will live on forever in the form of movies and video and YouTube and all the recordings now that are archived. But in a physical sense, while they're no longer here, there's something that gave a little bit of insight into them. Like I said, I would have loved to have met the woman who left the fudge recipe on her. I mean, it must be a great woman, right? It's like, you've been driving me crazy all these years. I'm dead now. Here, fine.
Right.
Leave me alone.
It must have been some pretty good fudge, I gotta say.
Mary Beth's question is, do you know anyone who might have tried an investigation where the World Trade Center was? No, I do not, and nor do I think it would be welcome, Mary Beth.
Agreed.
Under any circumstance. Somebody was talking about this the other day on the Sunday show in chat, and there have been pictures that people have taken. Now, I don't know how much of them is pareidolia or matrixing, shadowy figure. I don't know. It seems to me like a lot of them are. But in terms of investigation, I know for myself, if I ever heard about that, I would be upset at somebody. I don't know who. Either the people who were doing it or the people who gave them permission or let them in. I mean, there are some places, and you would agree, we talked about cemeteries. To me, Gettysburg is another one. Not the town. I'm talking about the battlefield. I mean, why? There are certain places in our state, the station, the site of the station fire.
Yep, I was going to bring that up.
It's
just let the souls rest. Don't go there looking for your cheap thrill or for your YouTube likes. That's just disrespectful. It's one thing if you go into someone's home and they've asked you to come in because they want to know if their grandmother is still around. But to just randomly go someplace where something tragic happened and there's going to be a lot of energy there, and this is how we'll get some activity. You're not an investigator when you do that. You are not. You're just a thrill seeker, and you're being disrespectful. There's no reason to do it.
Right.
I agree. I think that like Auschwitz, any of the death camps, World War II, any places like that, those are places I think.
Why?
I mean, as a sensitive, I'd love to tap in from the standpoint of not to investigate, but to determine, like, you're hoping that there's no one there still, right? Like you're like not World Trade Center, some of these other places, you're hoping that there's no one there still, right? That they're not stuck there or, trying to figure things out still. Like, you kind of are hoping that it's an empty, clear space of energy, but that can't be true just by virtue of the places that they are. But I think to investigate or attempt to investigate a place like that is beyond disrespectful myself.
Well, we do have
tasteless.
Who, in my opinion, is a jackass in this field. His name is Steve Huff. Are there any Steve Huff fans out there?
Yeah.
I don't feel as though I have to apologize for my opinion, but this is the guy who, when Michael Jackson dies, the next day he's trying to reach out to him. You know what I'm talking about? Or the Queen of England.
He does it when every celebrity does.
Yeah. Anytime someone famous dies, he tries to exploit it for his own, internet fame.
His rationalization for that is the quicker you do it, the better. Mm-hmm. So this guy sits in his living room or whatever and like, oh, Michael Jackson's talking to me. And, people eat that up, folks. They eat it up, and to me, I mean, do we really have to go to that length to what? For what? For what? For what reason?
15 minutes of fame. It's gross.
Yep.
Well, I'm certainly not going to reach out to Prince from my garage, and I know I talked about the speed of a thought and all the rest of that stuff, but for me, it's like I get a different sensibility on that. People are still grieving. People are still trying to figure out cause of death. People are still, I mean, you know, it's just, you're manipulating people's emotions.
Well, there's been
Um,
shysters in this field going back to the beginning. So.
yeah. There was another one from Android here where he talked about basically thought the show tonight was interesting because of the different art and etchings on gravestones.
Mm-hmm.
If you are going by, especially an old cemetery, and you just feel the need, like, I'm going to look around, you don't have to do it aimlessly, because gravestones can tell you a lot. And we used to chart them. I'll tell you why. Because if you find that there was an inordinate amount of young men who died in a certain year or within a couple of years of each other, that is a sign that there was probably a war, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If you find that a lot of people died in a certain short period of time, that could signal an epidemic in that particular town. There are always these little clues on these gravestones and in these cemeteries, and some of them are like, can be amazing stories. We have one here where I live where a guy is buried in an historical cemetery, and he had two wives, and they're both buried on either side of him. So that must be a funky dynamic, right?
Well, you
But
got to hear it from both sides forever.
Right?
Right?
Wow.
Yep.
But sometimes, if you go in and just say, hey, I'm going to just pay attention to the dates of death and things like that, and you got these cherubs and these etchings on it, it can be pretty fascinating. It can tell you a lot about the history of that
in
particular
some
place.
cemeteries, like I always go back to Swan Point because it's the one I'm most familiar with, you can see the gradual spreading of each stone as more people are added to the cemetery year after year. Like with Swan Point, I remember when I was a kid, there was a huge section of the cemetery that was empty. There were no stones or anything because it hadn't spread that far yet. But now as an adult, all that area that I remember being nothing but grass is now all headstones as far as the eye can see. And it would be interesting if you were to go there like every 6 months or every year to see, wow, how many people got buried in the past year, wonder why,
Right.
but a lot of cemeteries, you'll notice they just kind of grow in a certain direction until they run out of space.
Yeah, we've got another point here before we get out of here. Mary Beth, we had a tombstone here that said Negro. Do you think that was his or her name? Remember, I live in a small town farming community. There are,
like an insult to me.
I wouldn't even know where to start. That could be someone who, in the reparations, owned land, could have been a farmhand. There are a lot of things that could have been, because a lot of times, just because former slaves were given land doesn't mean that they associated with anybody. They had their land, they stayed by themselves, so no one probably even knew their name, first or last.
It might have just been an unknown African American that they wanted to at least give a proper burial to.
We have a host of those at our town hall here in Rhode Island, in Tiverton, buried out back, that was discovered and marked just using slate stones, and it's surmised that these were former slaves who were just, hey, Cody, what's going on? Cody dropping by. Cody had a busy day. Cody had a busy day today. But we're talking about a lot of things you can tell from cemeteries. And when you're talking about that era, if you're talking about Quakers and Puritans, you're probably not going to see any etchings on a tombstone. You will see a large slate stone, which is the headstone, and a smaller slate stone, which is the footstone. And nothing was inscribed on any of it because they didn't feel that the shell of yourself, your soul and spirit, was the thing that mattered. The body's just a vehicle.
Yeah.
You know, and the car broke down. So it was, you know, I think your head would be buried to the east, I believe. But in Quaker and Puritan cemeteries, you'll see a lot of that, headstones and footstones, no inscription, because the body didn't have any value. And the reason there's a head and footstone was just primarily to mark your burial spot so nobody would dig you up. Here's the headstone, here's the footstone. Okay, we have to start on this part of the footstone. So there wasn't a lot of memorialization or, you know, emotion spent or something like that. It was all about the soul and the spirit at that point. So when you had many of these black people who were not even considered half a person or had an identity at all, then those same practices may have been put forth in a public place, that their graves were just marked to let us know this is where they are. Make sure you don't dig them up. You know.
Yeah.
So, you know, it all depends on, you know, that particular religion or belief system.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I mean, we spent a good share of time researching cemeteries and things like that. You know, we don't spend a lot of time, but when I do, I kind of use that approach. It's like, if there's time, just take a look around at the dates, and don't do rubbings, because rubbings eventually denigrates the old headstones. I mean, so many people went to Mercy Brown's grave, the alleged vampire in Rhode Island, to do an etching, a rubbing, and then eventually just wore the thing down. So that's something, just be respectful. So I guess we're going to bring this to a close. We went a little over, but that's fine. So I would imagine we'll be back in a couple of weeks and think of some other crazy thing to talk about. If there's something that you think that we can, yes, Sarah, I invited Elise onto the show. She couldn't make it tonight. So we're always thinking. She knows a lot about this, but she couldn't make it tonight. If there's anything you want to leave in the comments that you want to get to, I like to do things a little off the beaten path with this, rather than talk to people who are smarter than me all the time and experts in their field. I like to get into.
Wait a minute. What are you trying to say about myself and Aaron? Wait a minute.
Yeah, right. You guys are definitely smarter than me. But yeah, leave them in the comments section. Let us know. It's like, hey, you know, but not the usual thing, because we can always do that on Sundays or anytime. But just to get together and, hey, listen, in the future, if any of you folks out there would like to come on and appear on camera with us and do something a little bit different than be in chat, let us know in the comments. You know, give us a shout and, hey, send me a code. I'll come on with you guys. You know, we'd love it. So I was thinking in terms of maybe the next time out talking about paranormal theories that make me crazy.
I like that one.
Yeah. Or accepted things in the paranormal. I'll give you an example before we get out of here. Debunk. I hate when somebody says we debunked it.
Yep.
I hate that. Debunk means to expose a fraud.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Not to figure out an alternative reasoning. That drives me crazy.
Mine is evidence. We caught evidence. We found evidence. No, you collected data.
You collected data.
If anyone had evidence, we wouldn't have to be doing this.
Right. we had all the answers, we don't need a new hobby.
Yes. Yep.
We could do that. We could do that. I'm gonna reach out.
That's a fun one.
Yeah,
We might be able to piss a few people off too.
I don't think so, because
No,
I think
it's all
everybody
fun.
but things again on TV, they're repeated and regurgitated, and they've been doing it for 20 years now.
All in the lexicon now. It's all pop culture now.
EMFs can make you go crazy.
Well, I mean, if technically you're right on top of them and they're very strong.
Right, exactly. So, all right. I thank you, Tom. I thank you, Erin, for giving us a little bit of your time tonight. And again, if there's something that you want to get into, it's what the comments are for. But make it a little bit to the left or right of center. You know what I mean? Because this is why we get together, to kind of take an hour of our time where we can just say, we don't even have to plan for this, because you never know what's going to come out of our mouths anyway. That's the best part about this.
Yes. Yeah, I was completely unprepared for this tonight.
Me too.
You should be.
Which makes it more fun, you know.
Well,
I agree.
All right, here's what we're doing tonight, folks.
Because I would have spent the day looking up celebrity tombstones. So
I've got an attachment.
Hi, Dawn.
Hey, Dawn.
Oh, she disappeared.
It's an attachment from 1982.
Cutest attachment ever.
There you go.
Walking around half dressed. It's like, we're live,
Hey.
That's great.
Well, so if you want to see us come on in 2 weeks half dressed, just leave a comment down there. No, she's not keeping me out of trouble at all, Joseph. Jesus. All right. So thanks again, Erin. Thanks again, Tom. Thanks everybody for tuning in tonight. This is the kind of show this is going to be, unscripted, and I love it. It's a lot of fun. So
Thanks for having me.
Always my pleasure. This has been just another paranormal podcast. We'll see you again in 2 weeks.